All right, guys, welcome to Championship Sunday. It's still morning. It's a pregame appetizer before Championship Sunday. No cooking, please. No recipes. And more importantly, you saw what happened in 2K basketball this week. No fake stunts of Uber eating drivers delivering to me during the broadcast. I do not deal with that. I will not accept any. I will not accept any payment. By the way, go Pride. I'm Steve Rabinowitz.
I'm Jay Kaplan.
I'm Anthony Strait.
I'm Joe.
And that is, yes, and that is Joe Tufaro. You've been on the show enough that you should get your own, you should still get it. But welcome back over here, Joe. It is a conference championship Sunday. The Super Bowl is full of pomp, circumstance, and almost everything with something resembling a game around it. I don't know if it's true, though. That's in 2 weeks. Today are the two games that actually determine who makes it there, and it's the epitome of a battle. Welcome, my friends, to Conference Championship Sunday. We'll review all 4 teams, plus we're evaluating the future of the New York Giants in 2023. But first, we'll talk about the New York Jets fans. And don't worry, New York Jets fans. I know you're allergic to the Super Bowl, so we'll tell you when to put the cream back on so you don't freak out in hives. They have hired Nathaniel Hackett as their new offensive coordinator, and Hackett has a spectacular resume. He was with the Jags for their AFC title game win in 2018, went to the Packers in 2019 to 21, 12-win season, 12-win season, 12-win season. He took a sabbatical from that job in 2022 to go on and be a head coach for the Denver Broncos, where he became the 5th coach to get fired in his rookie head coaching year. A 4-11 whoopsie of a season that may have ended the career of one Russell Wilson without ever needing an injury to do it. Anyway, Jay, Hackett has a very significant resume. I'm sure the name Aaron Rodgers is going to come up at least once in this segment, unfortunately. Great. At least twice, which means at least 5 times in this segment.
Twice from me.
Twice from you, but I have a feeling it'll be more. What do you think of the Hackett hire, even based on a non-Aaron Rodgers role?
This is less of a surprise, at least to me, than most people may think. I mean, after interviewing more than 15 candidates, Robert Saleh basically settled on one of the first names he put on his list when the Jets head coach started looking for Mike LaFleur's replacement. Hackett and Saleh worked together on Doug Marrone's Jacksonville staff 2015, 2016, and according to Saleh, Hackett checked every box, describing him as a home run hire. Saleh said it was important to hire someone with actual offensive coordinator experience, and Hackett's been the OC for top 10 offenses 3 times, Jacksonville in 2017 and Green Bay in 2021. But he's only been the primary play caller with the Jags and in his short tenure with the Broncos this past season. He was also the Bills offensive coordinator in 2013 and 14. They were middle of the pack in terms of yardage and points. But it should be noted that the quarterbacks he had were the likes of Blake Bortles, EJ Manuel, Cody Kessler, Thaddeus Lewis, Kyle Orton, and Jeff Toole. None of them will be getting a bust in Canton. On the flip side, Hackett did play an important role in Aaron Rodgers. Note mention number 1, being MVP in those 20 and 21 seasons while he was OC in Green Bay. Granted, head coach Matt LaFleur called the plays, but Hackett oversaw red zone planning and was heavily involved in the overall game plan. His background is West Coast offense, so don't expect the Jets scheme to change too much from what they ran under LaFleur, who was a Kyle Shanahan disciple. According to Saleh, here's the quote: "There's going to be some continuity there. He's got a proven history of being able to develop a heck of a run game in every stop he's ever been in. He's got a proven track record of tremendous relationships with all the quarterbacks he's ever worked with, had success with all the quarterbacks he's worked with. There's a lot of strengths with him, his commitment to complementary football, the experience. He's an innovative teacher," end quote. And when asked what Hackett's offensive approach looks like, Nick Kosmider, who's the athletic beat writer for the Broncos, said, quote, "He's steeped in the outside zone principles where you want to disguise the formation so that run and pass look the same. So he'll want to use, say, big receivers in the slot, things like that. His optimal version of the offense was never really able to get off the ground here," meaning Denver. "Once they lost running back Javonte Williams, he should be able to get his system to work better with who the Jets have at running back. Breece Hall, if he's healthy come next season." And while we know how bad the Broncos were offensively, there are a couple of positives that Jets can be hopeful for. Denver was the 14th most efficient red zone offense. Jets were 31st, and Denver was the 17th best was ranked 17th in rushing yards per carry. Jets were 24th, and that's despite losing Williams. Jets are going to build out Hackett's offensive scheme without knowing who the QB1 is going to be. It won't be Zach Wilson, and the rumor mongers and conspiracy theorists will play up Hackett's relationship with Rodgers, mention number 2. But no matter who takes the snaps, we should expect heavy emphasis on that running game. And as an organization, the Jets believe they can win with a top-flight defense and a productive rushing attack. That's how they started 6-3 this season before they nosedived and missed the playoffs. And they know that adding a quality quarterback could make that formula work even better. I've said it before on this show, and I will say it again. Some guys are just not meant to be head coaches. Their first best destiny is to be the coordinator of a great unit, and that's not a bad life for a football coach. Nathaniel Hackett has his work cut out for him, but here's hoping the New York media and the Rabbit fan base give him a pass until he has that quality quarterback running his scheme.
Did you say the words New York Rabbit fan base giving anyone a pass? Especially
I said New York media and Rabbit fan base. Yes, I realize I said that.
Neither are happening.
It's the off season for the Jets, Rabbi. I'm trying to be a little optimistic. Just saying.
Jonas, the 2022 version of Hackett kind of masked what happened in the 2017 to 21 version. Although I will be giving Blake Bortles Hall of Fame speech. I haven't written.
I had a feeling you would.
You guys know me well enough to know that, again, like Jay said, some guys just should do what they do. Do what you do really well, and that's what you should do. And Nathaniel, the only thing you feel bad for somebody like Hackett is, of course, everybody in the New York media and the fan base is only giving him credit for one thing: if he can get Aaron Rodgers here. They bring him in and he doesn't get Aaron Rodgers here, everybody's going to be like, oh, this was a waste to hire.
Which, by the way, seems to be what a lot of people think happened with Denver management. And
Right.
A lot of people thought that Russell Wilson was just really a fallback player.
Right. And they said, somebody said it the other day, they go, oh, so why is round 2 going to be any different? You hired him in Denver to get him there. He didn't go. You wound up having a head coach that you didn't really want, that wasn't any good. And putting all that pressure on, if you brought in Aaron Rodgers, we would have been a different team type of thing. And so you don't want that to happen here, but you're going to hear it. And if he loses, if they wind up without him, which Anthony and I will have this discussion once again, Aaron Rodgers ain't going nowhere.
No, he's not. People need to get over that fact.
We did this 2
Despite
years
all the
ago.
drama,
I
I'm not going anywhere, folks.
We did this 2 years ago, but whatever it does, even if he does, it doesn't matter. To this point, you hope that wasn't the real reason for the hire, and I don't believe it was.
No.
From Salah's point, but I also don't think Salah wanted to get rid of LaFleur. That was the owner walking in and saying, we need to do something. And you don't know with Woody Johnson. You don't know if that was his idea to say, oh, get that guy that knows Aaron Rodgers, because I read it in some trampy magazine someplace, because that's how he is. So that's the thing that you always worry about with the Jets, is how much, now that Woody's back, now that he's no longer the ambassador to Ireland, what's his influence on this? Did he walk in there and say, oh, let's do this? And I think it just minimizes Hackett, because he is a good OC. Again, failure as a head coach, but there's plenty of guys who've been failures as head coach who go back. Wade Phillips, all these guys that have been, everybody goes, oh, how do these guys get jobs again? Because that's what they do, and they're really good at it. So we'll see how that turns out.
And honestly, it would be on brand for Woody Johnson. Less so for his brother, but it would be very much on brand for Woody.
Yeah, I agree with both of you, Jay and Joe. Jay, obviously, some coordinators are better coordinators as coaches. We're going to see one later this afternoon in Kansas City, Steve Spagnuolo. Not a good head coach, but tremendous defensive coordinator for obviously the Giants, the part of this Super Bowl, and definitely done a good job at Kansas City, all things considered. But also, I agree with you, Joe. I don't think this is really much of a, let's see if we can sneer Aaron Rodgers away from Green Bay. There was some connection to Nathaniel Hackett and the Jets. His father, Paul Hackett, was an offensive coordinator for the team from 2001 to 2004. Here's a funny story. In 2004, he was the offensive coordinator and was criticized, obviously, for his play calling in that playoff game against the Steelers. My cousin played in that game. He dropped 2 very easy interceptions.
Wait, who's your cousin?
Derek Strait, by the way.
Yes,
you know Oklahoma.
right.
And he dropped
right.
He dropped 2 easy interceptions that probably would have helped win the game. when I have spoke to him, I haven't spoke to him in quite a while, obviously. When I have talked to him, I do go out my way to bring that up from time to time. But the thing was, his play calling was kind of the reason why he was out as offensive coordinator after that game. I think Hackett, because he has the same scheme, it might be an easier transition, a smooth transition, but the Jets still need some kind of a veteran quarterback, some kind of a presence. I don't think it'd be Aaron Rodgers, but I do think, and I'll talk to one of my friends, I do think Derek Carr is a good fit for this team because he's obviously in the prime of his career, but also he does have some leadership qualities that the Jets probably don't have on that side of the side of football. The Jets quarterback play is really the reason why they missed the playoffs, because they have the defense, and if Breece Hall healthy, they have a running game, they have weapons out and as far as the wide receivers are concerned, and just having to stabilize that quarterback play. And honestly, if Zach Wilson, it's not going to be the answer long term. You got to get somebody in there that'll be able to grasp the offense, be able to command that offensive huddle, and the guys be able to believe in. I mean, you went through 15. You obviously interviewed 15 guys before you settled on Nathaniel Hackett. I do think he's a better coordinator than a head coach. I mean, the Denver situation, which is a disaster from really the first Monday Night Football game with the game management issues towards the end of that game. So this obviously the Jets do lead themselves over to a little criticism if things don't work out. They don't get Aaron Rodgers, which I think is a complete long shot anyway. But at the same time, there is some connection. There's some relationship between him and Robert Saleh that Saleh at least has somebody that he feels he trusted. And to think about it, one of his the only time he had a top 10 offense was with Blake Bortles at quarterback. So clearly
Play
calling. It was play calling in the use of Leonard Fournette, by the way, in the running game, who at that time was a beast.
Never disrespect Blake Bortles, okay?
I never will disrespect. I will never disrespect Blake Bortles. I'm just going to put up over an LSU guy.
Hey, look, he has a forever spot in the good place. All right, leave that man alone.
Let me tell you something though. First of all, I wonder, when do you drop 2 passes in an AFC divisional playoff game at the family dinner table to Derek, and basically say, if you had just dropped those 2 passes, okay, that's what I figured. Athletes mocking other athletes. And one thing I would have to say is, with all of the Jets struggles, it's really about who they have at quarterback, and they need a name. They don't necessarily need Aaron Rodgers, who, by the way, you would have to get via trade, because I believe the dead cap hit is $99 million if the Packers decide to release
they're not
him.
doing that.
So they're not doing that. They're not doing that in any way, shape, or form. And that's going to be what it's going to be very interesting, because you need to make sure you have somebody who can competently run the West Coast offense, and that's not. And obviously, we mentioned that guy's not in the quarterback room. So.
And the only problem also is, now that you've set up the fans to believe it's Aaron Rodgers, is the second guy that comes in is now the disappointment, right? He's the second choice. Why couldn't we get? Even though it's not going to happen. Boomers talked about it all week. Everybody's talked about. They're all saying
too many people have talked about it and made it a story where it really isn't one. Because again, they're paying attention to the rumor.
Welcome to media. Welcome, by the way. Welcome to media. We make stories where there isn't one.
Exactly.
Conspiracy theorists isn't that the way I would put that. That's okay. All right, let's move on. Let's move on from Gang Green and keep the alliteration going with Big Blue. And while this season was all a dream for all of the fans of the Giants, getting to the divisional round for the first time since 2012, last Saturday, nightmare. By the end of the first quarter of that divisional round matchup against Philadelphia, it was 14-0, and the Eagles really never looked back. A confident 38-7 victory. Okay, guys, very good trivia here. The Giants lost by 63 points in the 3 matchups against the Eagles this year. That's the most margin against an opponent since 1929. When the Giants did this against.
Wait, what year was that?
1929.
I want to say the Eagles again.
Oh, no. It was the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets beating them 32-0, 12-0, and 31-0. So we weren't even close to that time. So unfortunately for us, we're going to do our post-mortem as the Eagles are now looking ahead to training camp in July. Joe, you are one of our most foremost Giants experts out there. We did not bother you with too many Jets questions, so you place the metaphorical crystal ball on the table and start asking us some questions about the 2023 training camp. Jay, start us off.
Yep. The talent disparity between the Giants and the Eagles on stark display in that 38-7 loss to Philly in the divisional round. So despite a 9-7-1 record and a playoff berth in the first year under GM Joe Schoen and head coach Brian Daboll, this team still needs an upgrade at multiple positions. Schoen seems to be completely aware that the Giants are still in the early stages of a rebuild, even if the first year put him at his schedule. Now on paper, and we've talked about this ad nauseum with you and without you, it would seem obvious that wide receiver 1 is where a major upgrade is needed, but Schoen has kind of slowed the roll on that being the top priority. And here's his quote on it. I know that a number 1 wide receiver can be important, but there's some number 1 wide receivers that are home right now. Number 1 receiver doesn't guarantee you anything. I think it's important that we continue to build the team, and there's multiple positions where we want to upgrade throughout the offseason. So yeah, I'd love to have a number 1 wide receiver. We've got to place value on everything we do. And if it makes sense, that's something we'll look to do. Now, granted, the wide receiver free agent market is underwhelming. This is going to make it easier for Schoen to avoid another Kenny Golladay situation, hopefully. And he has said from day one that the draft will be the path to building a sustainable winner. So Joe, with all that as a lead up, what offensive position would you prioritize for an upgrade this offseason?
Yeah, and just to comment, they had a talent disparity against most of the teams they played this year, and it's just, that's again, it shows that they got the right coaching staff. It shows that they got the right culture in there, and that they're moving in the right direction. And I think that's why Giant fans are happy about where we started and where we go. And you do have to look at, again, building a team, and I think sometimes we get off on these tangents of the quarterback gets all the credit or all the disparity with this.
Too much of both.
Guys get picked on all the time. Justin Jefferson's the greatest wide receiver in football, but he's sitting home because you had to take one guy away, and then you had to get a quarterback that had no confidence in anybody else, or had no confidence in even him making a play on a big play. Rabbi texted me right away last week when the first pass Jalen Hurts throws is a 50-50 ball, and the guy comes down with it. So you have to trust those guys to do that. And that takes away sometimes from your quarterback play and saying, don't ever throw the ball up to this unless it's that guy. Then you can do whatever the hell you want. So I think that's where the Eagles have it over the Vikings. But to get back to your question, yeah, offensively, they still need offensive linemen. They still need guys who can rotate in there. They still need another stud. They need Evan Neal to take the jump that Thomas took in his second year. They need to figure out who's healthy and who's not. Nick Gates not getting comeback player of the year, by the way, is the biggest.
That's a crime.
Is unbelievable. The fact that Alex.
Well, there's other offensive choices that we're going to be going over, like Gino and Saquon. I think we understood that. It's the definition of that word.
Fair,
really
but
is really more.
But I'm just saying, you look at somebody like that, and again, you have to determine now as a personnel guy. Is that guy worth keeping? Did he lose anything coming back from the injury? Was he the fact that he got back from the injury and started in the last 4 or 5 games may be more of a, an indictment on the rest of your team than it is to give him credit for getting back there and starting as an offensive lineman. So I always think it's trenches. I always think it's offensive line. I think they showed you that if you get some guys who actually have a couple of 2 hands on their arms that they use, Hodgins was fine. Bellinger was fine. Richie James made some nice catches. He had a 3 or 4 game stretch in there where he dropped a few balls. So you don't need to go get that number 1 guy, as again, we're not 1 player away. And that's what everybody has to understand. You can't go, if we had T. Higgins next year, we would win 15 games. That's not the key. That's not the one thing that you need on that offense. So I think they have to continue to draft offensive linemen. Maybe that's where you go a little bit in free agency since they have some money this year. If you can find somebody who wants to come in and be another anchor on the other side, or be a guard or a center or somebody like that, like they've done in the past when they went out and got different guys to start for their 2 Super Bowl teams. Both guys were free agent centers. So I think you need to build that offensive line more. And then again, continue to find guys, Wan'Dale Robinson's coming back, who they drafted last year, who didn't get to play. He was playing well. For the 4 or 5 games he played, he was starting to make strides. So again, you have to go back and find these guys. And Jay, I'm the one who harps on draft day every year. I tell you, rookies get hurt, right? And that's what happens. So bring those guys back, bring the tight end back, see what we can build up here and go from there. But I don't think they're that far off. With Daniel Jones making those strides and being able to find guys that are open instead of worrying about trying to get the ball to one guy. I think that would only make it regress. So
maybe what'll be interesting for me, Joe, you talk about, the wide receiver room is, can Sterling Shepard finally stay healthy? Because we know that when he's on the field, he and Jones have a very unique connection and chemistry. He's a guy you count on to move the chains. So the Giants, when they're all healthy, the Giants do have a more interesting wide receiver room than many people might be giving them credit for.
And they obviously had a lot of depth because they were able to lose a bunch of guys and still put a team on the field. I mean, they just signed David Sills again to another futures contract. You have to work with these guys. Yeah, none of them were walk out of college superstars where you were just going to throw it up to them and they're going to make the catch. They needed to work at getting open. They needed to learn the NFL. They need to learn how to play 17 games instead of 10. All that stuff is big. And that's, I just don't think that I agree with Joe Shane. You're not one player away. If you went out and got Justin Jefferson, you wouldn't suddenly be in this round of the playoffs. So, build it as a team.
What's funny is I'm reading this Sportskeeda article. I mean, there's always articles of the top 10 free agent wide receivers out there. I know you don't really get into free agency when you're in the skill position because you get signed beforehand. At number 7 is Darius Slayton, just to let you know. So you have a room there. And something you and I have talked about, Jay, a bunch of times this year is the wide receiving core has improved week in and week out in that room. You have to find a way, if you're going to get a wide receiver, which I think they'll probably get someone, maybe more of a veteran, is where they slot in that group, because there's a lot of talent in that position, and really in that locker room, there's the foundation that was built this season, and it's about the foundation first, I think, in my opinion. But that's just me. Anthony, let's talk to you.
It is nice to have a coach that plays whoever deserves to play that week. There's none of this guy has to be out there, whatever. Everybody. It's
actually something that's been pretty consistent with the Giants organization, unless you're Kadarius Toney, but that was because he was lazy. All right, Anthony, your turn.
Yeah, despite the defensive side of football, they had a lot of injuries off on this season. Particularly defensive backfield with Dory Jackson, Xavier McKinney. And then we saw kind of a lack of depth in the linebacker department halfway through the season as well. Despite all that, Wink Martindale's group did a lot better than people would have thought under the circumstances. But the Eagles gashed him for 268 yards on the ground last Saturday night. Pretty much as an eye-opener, the fact that a good group, there's still a lot more to be done. And on that side of football, where would you, if you was a GM, be focusing on to kind of upgrade the defensive side of football for the Giants?
Yeah, and we mentioned it a little bit last week when I was kidding Jay about how when we grew up with the Giants, that's the whole defense was about their linebackers, and now you can't find one in the last 15 years that's done anything. Ever since Antonio Pierce left, or you can't really find anybody who's been any good, who's been any consistent. So. And Carl Banks was talking about this. Of course, he's a little prejudiced, but he was talking about this during the podcast of saying, look, if you're going to get double teams on Dexter Lawrence and double teams on Leonard Williams, somebody's got to fill those gaps, and guys have to take the right spots. There have to be those run fits that you hear guys talk about all the time, and that's what that's all about. Is it's okay for those guys to take 4 guys. For those 2 guys to get 4 guys blocking them is fine, as long as there's 3 guys behind there that know where they're supposed to be and can penetrate and get it back there. So, I'm not as worried about the defensive backfield, Anthony, only because, again, what it allowed them to do is get guys playing time and see if they can play. I mean, McLeod and Flott and a couple of those other guys back there at safety even got to play. And you got to see them make some plays. And again, it gives you a rotation. It gives you a chance to do different things. I think in the Eagle game, Wink was stuck with, if I play 6 or 7 defensive backs like I did against Minnesota, because I want to cover everybody, they're going to run the heck out of me because they have really good running game. They have a really good offensive line. So he was kind of caught in between because he couldn't play a 4-4 3 defense because he didn't have 4 guys at linebacker. So, and the NFL's changed also because of this edge guy. You say the Giants play 3 down linemen, but they actually play 4 because Thibodeau's always down there, or Azeez Ojulari is always down there. So there's always at least 4 guys standing there. It's just a matter of which side do they come from and what do they use as far as pressures. But I think you need to find some linebackers. Think you need to find a middle linebacker. I think you need to find guys who are run stoppers, but are still athletic enough to cover somebody, because you want somebody who can play 3 downs. And I don't know how many guys are even left out there, because again, college has become so specialized with 100 guys on the sideline that you can play a different guy in every down, not even know who he is. And they don't ever get that way of doing that. I don't know if there's any big linebackers coming out of college that are going to go in the top 10 of the draft where you could say, oh, this guy's, a Luke Kuechly type guy, or Van Der Esch, or even those type of guys who are so good at being able to do multiple things. But I think he understands that. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with Leonard Williams. Does he take a pay cut? Does he give him a little bit of a break? And then is Ojulari ever going to be healthy? Here's another guy on defense, right, that you kind of counted on. And I know you rushed him back for the playoffs because you needed somebody on the other side for a while. But even the Eagle game, he was out pretty early. And so basically you wasted a roster spot for 2 games. But I think Shane understands that's what will make Martindale's defense a little bit more solid and help him on that side of the ball, to give him even more options of what to do, is if you get a couple of more run stopping, not pass rushing linebackers to be able to play him in the middle, because I'm sure he'd like to have that dual inside. Carter Kaplan has never really developed into that and stuff. So, I think he'd like to have 2 big guys in the middle like they used to have with, Reasons and Carson and those type of guys standing next to each other, and then have the 2 guys on the outside who are able to rush or cover guys. So I think that's on defense. That's exactly where they need to go, is find some run stoppers, find some linebackers.
All right, so this is going to be a 2-part question, kind of tying everything up from the first question a little bit. So obviously the main concern in the offseason is signing Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley, 2 new contracts. I want to know how you think the Giants are going to go about that. And I want to also know what you think is going to be too much for Saquon, because that's always going to be a guy who's going to garner a lot based on potential. And then out of who's left, and there's 21, and there's 19 there's 19 unrestricted free agents, 1 restricted free agent left to go for the Giants, including pretty much the whole entire wide receiving core that we mentioned in the first segment. Where do you think the Giants prioritize their first re-signing out of the rest of that bunch?
Yeah, and I think it's Daniel Jones, and I think it's somewhere in the, I thought in the bye week, if they had offered him 6 years at 20 a year or 5 at 20 a year, he would have jumped at it at that point. I think now that he's gotten a little bit more confidence in himself, I think he realizes, now he's going to sit with his agents and send them in. He's not going to take.
You think he would have even jumped at that, even though the hot start that he got into? You think he still would have been like, I'll take a 5 for 100?
I agree with Joe on this.
Yeah, I think he would have done that at that point because he saw his development. He wanted to be with this coaching staff. He saw himself being successful here, and so why not stay here? And it's still, if he took 5 years, he'd still be 29 or 30 at the time of the next deal. So, he would have set himself up for being good then too. If he doesn't, I think a kid from his upbringing and the way he is, the fact that he could get into the Eli camp of I'll do every commercial there is, and all that stuff in the off season that New York brings you and different things, that he's smart enough to say, I want to be here because the Giants take care of you. And again, he gets to sit next to Eli every day and have that conversation. So I think he would have. I think now it gets into the 25 million a year to 30 because you have to respect them. I don't like the comps that they're giving him, Jameis Winston, and like putting him in the second tier of guys. I understand you can't pay him 40 a year or 45 million a year like he was somebody else, but I think all those contracts are going to come back to bite those teams anyway. But I think he's the first one that's got to go because they show the leadership. They show that they want to keep him. They show what's going to be there as their foundation. Saquon's tougher. And Saquon said some things on both sides of this. So, I'm not looking to reset the bar. I understand I put myself in a bad spot being hurt. I understand this. He doesn't want to be at franchise because it's actually almost a pay cut, giving him only 10 a year. But, in the NFL, what's nice is there's so many different ways of paying guys, right? Because and Patty Traina actually did a really good article for Sports Illustrated of saying, there's so many different ways of doing incentives. And there's things called likely to be obtained incentives and unlikely to be obtained incentives. And they count differently against the cap, and they count differently against the cap going forward. And there's voidable years, and there's injury settlements, and there's all kinds of stuff. So, if he scored 10 touchdowns last year, should you give him an incentive if he reaches that again? If he plays, you could pay him per game as a bonus. Every game he starts, he gets an extra $500,000. You can do all this stuff to make sure that you're covering yourself, but also giving him the money if he is productive, that he gets up to that $13 to $15 million a year range that McCaffrey got or whatever. And, McCaffrey's probably the best comp only because he was hurt also. But he did get traded. I mean, the only way he got paid is because he got traded. So he wasn't getting paid in Carolina. So, that's the thing, is you hope that they can do this, and you hope that he's a smart kid. He is doing all those commercials in New York already. He's well liked. He knows the fans like him. He knows he's in a good spot. He knows he'd like to be in that building with those coaches and with that organization to walk in and see the Super Bowl trophies. And, it gives you that good feeling when you're around that team. And I think the owners want him back. I think the owners definitely want Daniel Jones back. So I think you get through there. But, about the other part, Rabbi, is, and Dable said this, he goes, look, this is the NFL. When I walk into that room in April this year, 50% of those guys are going to be gone. That's just how it is. And he said, that's the NFL these days, is, I walk in there. Half the guys will be gone. I mean, you'll never have this team together. As much as fans love to go, oh, what a great team. We just need to add 2 guys. And you go, yeah, well, that's impossible. Now, I guess the Amazon money comes next year or in 2 years, right? The salary cap.
It's going to go up, but it's not going to go up, I think, to a tremendous amount where you're going to be in a position because of how much the quarterback contracts are going up. You might be able to fit a better running back or better skill positions. But I think as much as the Amazon contracts go up because of the offseason that we had last year with Deshaun Watson getting the guaranteed money and other people getting guaranteed money and higher contracts than they should have, I think almost those kind of offset.
Yeah, but
the problem
on a team like the Giants, if you can say to Saquon and go, hey, we'll give you 13 base next year or 12 base next year plus all the incentive. The year afterwards, we can give you 15 plus, you can backload it a little bit, knowing that it's going to go up by it's not going to go up by $2 million like it has in the past. It may go up $22 million, which is a big difference in the NFL. And
I think,
and if you can keep Daniel's contract at a normal rate, they're not paying him $50 million. So that's a big, per year. So that's a big savings on that end. And I think they'll be able to work it out. I trust Shane and his guys to be able to figure it out. And, you'd love to see both of them stay for the next 10 years, but we all know that's not going to happen. So.
I think you just said perfectly. I think in that discussion, if you talk about Christian McCaffrey, I think I found out the one guy out of all of those who I really think the Giants should bring back and put in a bigger role. Matt Breida did a pretty good job last year being the complement to Saquon. And I think because of his young age of 27, I think you can get someone like Breida on the really cheap. And you could make that team work with a good, maybe not necessarily a Thunder and Lightning, but a 50% chance of Thunder and a 100% chance of Lightning type rule. It's like a 2/3, 1/3. That would be my opinion, but Giants have a lot of discussions to things to go into the offseason. And I really am, and I think something that we need to table is what the market on Saquon is going to be, because I think it might be too high. I know running backs are always overvalued throughout the league, but I think with the McCaffrey trade, and the fact that McCaffrey, basically the only loss that the 49ers have had since that McCaffrey trade, I might be spoiling something for the next segment here. One, it was 5 days after they lost to the Chiefs, but they didn't really put McCaffrey in that system yet. Since then, they haven't lost. So we'll see what happens. This is going to be a very interesting offseason for the Giants. All right.
Two things to keep in mind real quick, Rabbi. One, Shane has already established that he'll give roster bonuses and games played bonuses to guys as part of the standard contract language. So that's already something that's been established. And two, the thing with Jones, the lower level of the franchise tag is 32 million. The upper level of the franchise tag is 45. So it is incumbent upon them to not have to use either tag on him for the rest of their cap purposes, and those almost 20 other free agents they got to figure out what to do with.
That's more of an Aaron Rodgers guarantee. They're not doing that. I don't think they are. All right. Yes, that might be it. All right. So I want to kind of change tracks a little bit before we go to our conference championship preview. I wasn't a big fan of the guy, but with all respects to the late Billy Packer, who we lost this week at the age of 82, who called every Final Four from 1975 to 2008. Packer can now be seen forming heaven's most energetic three-man booth calling basketball games with Dick Enberg and Al McGuire. The road to the Final Four in football ends today. Last season, it was a little weird parity-wise. It seemed like a 2 seed, 2 4 seeds had a 6 seed in this spot. This year, it's a little more normal, 2 1s, a 2, and a 3. But when you see the teams, it's only one new team from last year to this year. So it's a very interesting season that we're going to talk about right now. That's in perpetuity today. And then we get the exhibition now. Let's start with the AFC Championship, as the Cincinnati Bengals and Kansas City Chiefs are meeting in this spot again. The Chiefs finished with a better record than the Bengals, which gives them home field advantage in this matchup again. But after the Bills choked in the divisional round, again, it leads to a chance for the Bengals to beat the Chiefs again. The Bengals have won 3 in a row in this rivalry. Last year in week 17, AFC Championship, this year in week 13. All those wins by 3 points, by the way. So all of this, someone has a hold over someone else. It's 3 close victories in a row. But 4 in a row, and the Bengals take back-to-back Super Bowls. What worlds am I living in? Let's begin with the Chiefs. They are still very much the Chiefs in a post-Tyreek Hill season. Rumors of their demise greatly exaggerated. Going 14-3. None of us picked them for the Super Bowl though. So
I know.
Maybe not necessarily the thing. Maybe not necessarily we maybe thought they were a little banged up. But they are banged up now, Anthony. Patrick Mahomes, high ankle sprain. So how are we going to see the Chiefs get back to Super Sunday?
Well, 2 days. Number one, this is crazy. I don't think there's ever been a time where you've seen 2 teams play 4 games in 1 calendar year, including 2 of those being conference championship games.
It's a little over a calendar year. The first meeting was in 2021. That first matchup, though, in the first week in 2021.
Yeah, that's number one. Number two, if you're Kansas City, your quarterback has a high ankle sprain. I don't know if being at home and the temperature being in the 20s on a grass field, that's going to feel like feel frozen after a while. It's the greatest idea over a neutral site playing inside a dome. But we'll see how that goes. For Kansas City, it's pretty obvious. They gotta have some balance on offense. Go back to the week 13 game. They had 27 pass plays, but they ran the ball 25 times. So they had a good little balance on that side of the football. And they're gonna have to lean on a running game a little bit. Obviously, Mahomes having a high ankle sprain, his mobility being one of his biggest X factors, it's not there. You saw that how he finished the game with Jacksonville. He could barely move, and he was pretty much limping around the field from the second quarter on. So they're going to have to get some kind of offense, try to run the ball a little bit, maybe take away some of the pass rushes from Cincinnati, and that allows things to open up a little bit more for Patrick Mahomes down the field. But also, they have to protect them, and that's the most important thing. If you think back to the matchup, the previous 2 matchups, including last year's AFC title game, one of the biggest things was Cincinnati being able to hit home on just a 4-man rush and just dropping everybody back in coverage. And Patrick Mahomes had a hard time in the second half of that AFC title game a year ago trying to get away just with a 4-man rush. Now he really can't move, and that's going to be a bit of a thing that's imperative that Kansas City has to protect Patrick Mahomes at all costs. On the other side of football, defensively, they got to get at the quarterback. I mean, you only got Joe Burrow one time in that week 13 matchup, and we saw when Buffalo was able to hit home. You let Joe Burrow just sit back there with plenty of time to find guys. It's pretty much game over. And that week 13 matchup, he completed 80% of his passes. And Kansas City is second in the NFL in sacks this season, behind Philadelphia, who obviously is in the NFC Championship game. So on both sides of the ball, it's pretty obvious. You gotta protect the quarterback. You gotta be able to get the running game going. And so that Patrick Mahomes is not dropping back 30 to 40 times this afternoon. On the defensive side of the ball, you gotta dirty up Joe Burrow's jersey. I mean, if he's walking around by the third quarter and that really nice all white uniform is clean as a Tide commercial, Kansas City's gonna have problems this afternoon. And that regardless of where this game being played. I mean, a clean quarterback jersey is a bad sign that your defense is not getting the job done.
They ain't winning if that happens, by the way. I'm telling you right now. And they ain't winning, as that's a line that has only 2 starters left. And last week they looked probably better than they had all season long, like they've been playing for 20 weeks in a row, which they have most certainly not. All right. Well, Joe, Jay, and Anthony decided to jump on the Bills bandwagon in the beginning of the season. I decided to jump on to the Bengals lifeboat. All they did was win the AFC last year, and now, Jay, I got a preseason Super Bowl pick here on the line with the Cincinnati Bengals. Don't worry, Anthony. Don't worry, Anthony. You're getting your flowers in a few minutes. So the Bengals could be the first Super Bowl loser to make it back to the big game that is not quarterbacked by Tom Brady in almost 3 decades. What's the key for Joe Cool and the boys today?
Well, Anthony, I want to thank you for touching on what the Bengals defense needs to do, which means I don't have to talk about it. Lose cleanup crew, as they're calling themselves, as long as they keep doing what they've been doing to Patrick Mahomes over those last 3 games, they'll be fine. But you mentioned Joe Burrow, and here's the thing for me, Rabbi, having a rematch of not only a regular season matchup, Bengals beating the Chiefs 27-24 in Cincinnati week 13, but also a rematch of the previous year's conference championship game where the Bengals went into Arrowhead and won by the same score to advance to the Super Bowl, has really added to the run-up of tonight's game. It also gave me 3 angles to look for with the Bengals. 1, can Cincinnati continue to run the ball effectively? I said they needed to find their run game coming into the playoffs after closing out the season, averaging just 60.3 yards on 2.8 per carry in their final 3 games. They struggled in the wild card game, but that's the Ravens, hence only 51 yards and 2.8 per carry. They broke out against the Bills, 172 yards, 5.1 a carry. Joe Mixon had 105 on 5.3 per carry to lead the way. Now, the Bengals have had success this season featuring run schemes with pulling linemen. They average 6 yards a carry on trap plays, 5.8 yards a carry on power runs, 4.8 yards a carry on pull leads this season. Scheming this way with their O-line has managed to keep the run game effective despite the injuries, and they'll need to keep that going against KC, and history would seem to be on their side with that. 116 yards on 4.5 a carry. Last year's AFC title game, Joe Mixon, 88, 4.2 yards per carry to lead the team. They had 152 yards, averaging 4.5 yards a carry on the ground in the regular season. Samaje Perine led the way in that one, 106 yards, 5 per carry. Can Joe Burrow continue to be Joe Cool, as the Rabbi referenced? Bengals are going to need him to continue to come up big in high leverage situations. That's red zone and 3rd and 4th down, like he's done all season. He's been the NFL's best quarterback in those situations. Here are the numbers. EPA per dropback, 0.82, first. Passer rating, 122.1, first. Touchdown to interceptions, 10-0, tied for first. Sacks, 0, tied for first. Off-target percentage, 0, first. They'll also need him to continue to make great decisions with the ball. Pro Football Focus has him for only 7 turnover-worthy plays in his last 13 games. In 6 career postseason games, just 2 turnover-worthy plays. Strangely enough, both were in last year's AFC Championship game. Case can be made. Burrow played his best game of the regular season in the Week 13 win over KC. 286 yards, 9.2 per attempt, 25 of 31, a little under 81% completion. 2 scores, 0 picks, sacked just once on 37 dropbacks, pressure just 21.1% of the time. 126.6 passer rating, 0.48 EPA per dropback. rate. They were his second best single game rates of the season. Killed the Chiefs on middle of the field throws, 18 of 20 for 179 yards and a score on throws inside the numbers. Kansas City has a propensity to play cover 2 at a high rate. They were at 41.7 in that game. Burrow, killed them on high-low combos and quick seam routes. When KC did drift into man, Burrow killed him with his ability to read that late movement by the Chiefs secondary, deliver the ball on location in their base 3 concepts with in-breaker and slant routes with the ball thrown to the upfield shoulder. Finally, and this to me is the big one, can the Bengals keep finding creative ways to get Jamar Chase the ball? When you're at this level of playoff game against an opponent who knows you well, your stars need to play like stars. And for Cincy, that starts with the LSU connection, Burrow to Chase. Chiefs have made adjustments since Chase went off on them for 11 catches, 266 yards, and 3 TDs in week 17 last season. They've used more doubles and more cover 3 cloud. That's 3 deep in the secondary with cover 2 at the line of scrimmage to jam and reroute a tier 1 wide receiver with help over the top. More of that in covering Chase to limit his game-breaking ability. Been effective to an extent. Only 6 catches for 54 yards in the AFC title game, though he did get into the end zone. 97 yards on 7 catches in the regular season game this year, did not score. To combat that, and you saw this in the Buffalo game, the Bengals have increased the number of plays that put Chase on the move. They've even been lining him up in the backfield to keep extra defensive help off him. As I said, against Buffalo, 9 plays, and that, including 4 of the first 12 with Chase in the backfield at some point during the play, meaning he either lined up, moved out, or in orbit motion through it. Bengals gained 107 yards, 11.9 yards per play on those. 4 pass plays out of those formations. Burrow, 4 for 466, including the 28-yard TD to Chase on the opening drive. 5 run plays, they gained 41 yards, 8.2 per carry. Chase has a touchdown in 5 of his last 6 games, averaged 12 targets per game during that span. Burrow's going to look at them early and often, especially in those most crucial moments, like those high leverage moments I mentioned earlier. And Chase is going to need to come through against the Chiefs secondary, especially when they dare to play man coverage. He leads the NFL in most yards per average yards after catch over expected. And the Kansas City secondary has allowed the second most TD passes on 10+ air yards. All 3 of these keys are going to be what I'm watching for with the Bengals. And if they're able to execute them at the levels I called out here, they're repeating as AFC champs.
There's so much about Joe Burrow's game that I love that you do have to overlook some of the cockiness that he has, which is, by the way, completely deserved because he has some of the best gifts that you've ever seen from a quarterback in almost 15 to 20 years. I did pick the Bengals to make it to the Super Bowl. I am not happy with the cockiness going into this game because when you
Rabbi, is it cockiness or is it confidence? With Burrow,
it can be a little
confidence.
With Burrow, it's confidence. With the rest of the team, it might be cockiness, by the way, and that's something I would be a little concerned about going into that game.
Here's looking at you, Eli Apple.
That would be number 1, by the way, on that board.
Yes,
actually, that's cockiness. All right, let's go to the earlier game of the day. It's for the NFC Championship. The Eagles and the 49ers, 2 storied organizations, have only met once in the playoffs back in 1996 in a 14-0 game that Anthony had showed us the link to this week, and it was pure Pat Summerall and John Madden sloppy playoff football at its best. These were the 7 and 6 seeds in last year's postseason, and now they're the 1 and 2 seeds. They're looking to capture the glory of yesterday. For the Niners, it's 1994. For the Eagles, it's 2018. Anyway, Joe, you and I will take care of this one. The Eagles have only lost once with Jalen Hurts under center this year. Now, in the scariest moment for 2000s Eagles fans, it's a conference championship game of the afternoon. Run and hide. If you saw the Bucs game in 1990 in early years, and then anyway, Joe, what's the Eagles' key to fly to the desert?
Well, being home is going to be a big deal for the Eagles. So that's going to help them a lot in the situation. It's funny how when you watch San Francisco play, you notice, it's 6-6 in the third quarter. It's 9-6. They don't look that good. How come this team can't score any points? And then you come back from the refrigerator and it's 31-13. What the hell happened? Because Purdy's playing so well and a couple of other guys are so amazing on that team. But I think for the Eagles, when you watch the Eagles play, it's the opposite way around. Is they figure out a way to get a lead on you and then you're done because they try to make you one-dimensional. And I think that's what San Francisco has to try to avoid at this point is getting away from one part of their game. The Eagles are very strong up front, like we talked about, for what the Giants need to do. The Eagles are fantastic on the defensive line, fantastic on the offensive line. They have good schemes. They have wonderful wide receivers that, again, Jalen Hurts seems to trust in those moments when he can throw up 50-50 balls. Hurts didn't look 100% last week, even though he did run for one touchdown. So I think he's going to be even better this week. And I think that, you know, if they can, again, it's all about, you know, I was hoping the Giants would play a spy against him last week, and they didn't. I didn't hear Landon Collins' name once last week, as a matter of fact. But I think that you have to be careful with. You know, we've seen the Boses of the world just do their thing where they just get upfield and try to come around the corner, and Hurts will kill you if you do that. If you leave that one side open, he's going to take it all day long. And if he is more of 100%, he's going to hurt them with their legs. So I think for the Eagles, the key to them is always the same thing: is make you one-dimensional by picking you apart either in the air or on the ground and sticking with it. As much as nobody likes Nick Sirianni, I think their philosophy is, if we can run the ball against you, that's what we'll do. And then we'll come back and get you later on when we have to. But again, or if we can pick you apart on the pass, we'll do that all day until we get to that point where we get that lead. Once they get that defense, like you said, Rabbi, at 14-0 or 17-0, once you get that, it's over, because those guys will just come after will just pass rush. But again, they do it in an intelligent way that they don't give up yards on the ground. So I think that for the Eagles being home, for the Eagles wanting this to that point where they haven't been here in a long time, this is a team that's kind of been rejuvenated from 2 years ago, where everyone thought they were a mess when Peterson left, and they had no starting quarterback, and you know, they had nothing that we thought on that last Sunday night game where they threw the game.
Where they basically handed the Washington football team a division. Let's be
so they could go
honest.
Lose to Tampa, where the Giants would have beaten Tampa and would have made the world a better place. But I think that for the Eagles, again, I think that's their key to their game, is try to get out to an early lead. They don't mind taking shots. They don't mind throwing up those 50-50 balls. If they get ahead by 14, 17 points, I don't see San Francisco, even with all their weapons, coming back against them. But San Francisco has certainly surprised a lot of people this year, and Purdy is playing like a veteran, and again, he has a ton of weapons around him that help him do that. He made some really nice plays last week, but he made some plays to guys that only those guys can make those plays.
And that's what I would like, and that's what I'm about to talk about with Brock Purdy, by the way, as well. So by the way, Anthony, I'm sure when you picked San Francisco to make the Super Bowl out of the NFC, you assumed that they would be doing it with Mr. Irrelevant Brock Purdy as quarterback, right? Not Trey Lance, not Jimmy G, but Mr. Irrelevant Brock Purdy as quarterback. So time to give you your flowers, as you are one pick win away from having a Super Bowl prediction correct. But I think Brock Purdy is a huge key. I think my key for Brock Purdy is not win the game, but don't lose the game in the first half, because I think that's when I've seen Purdy play at its worst. And I think I talked about this with Jay last week. Shanahan's first 15 scripted plays are almost like a safe haven for Brock Purdy, and you have to realize that in the games that you had with him, yes, he hasn't played outside of the Mountain Time Zone until today. You might want to be careful, but take some chances with what he does, because, as Joe said, Purdy puts these balls in only a place where their receivers can catch it. But that's the reason why you got those receivers to have those 50-50 balls be more like 60-40 balls, 65-35 balls, because Deebo Samuel is a registered weapon with the national weapon security. Brandon Ayuk has become a very reliable number 1, number 2 type guy, and the guy who can move the chains, and you have to be very careful with. The numbers aren't great for Purdy, but he's won. Obviously, that we know that already. But the numbers, if you look at it, is only thrown 2 interceptions, one against Washington and one against Vegas, in what was probably his worst game, but he went 22 for 35 for 284 in that game. But his also his completion percentage, that kind of leads into what Joe said. His passes aren't tremendously accurate sometimes. He only has 17 to 26, 15 to 22, 15 to 20, 18 to 30. And last week he was 19 to 29. That was probably statistically his worst game, but he played better than the guy on the other side of the ball. So I think that's the key for Purdy. And the man who has been really the benefit of all Purdy has done is the security blanket, who's also a registered weapon. That's George Kittle. Kittle had 11 touchdowns this year, but 7 of them have come after Purdy was after Purdy started. He had a flurry at the end of the season going for 7 touchdowns in the final 4 games. And then last week, he just made every catch in that third quarter, especially the go-ahead drive, and a ball that he had to juggle essentially because Purdy threw it just a tiny bit.
And he wasn't
too
even
far.
part of the route. He wasn't
in the route. It wasn't the route at all.
Point.
But as many people have seen, that's a football savant right there. A wrestling savant and a football savant in George Kittle. He is one
and
of
Rabbi,
the guys who.
Does anybody seemingly these days have more fun playing football than that guy? I mean,
he's essentially Gronk version 2.0 plus another 75 plus another 70 IQ points higher. But I think really there's a lot going on with Kittle. Defensively, they're a team that plays the most consistent defense from first whistle to last whistle. But you've seen in the first halves of these games, going back to the Vegas game, which they barely won, they let Jared Stidham basically throw all over the field. And Jared Stidham is only a guy who can really work in the Josh McDaniels system, and that was his first game. Geno Smith had a pretty much perfect first half because they didn't really challenge him. And you could easily challenge him because Geno Smith is not completely accurate when he's pressing, and he was pressing a lot during that game. And last week, if Dak doesn't throw a couple of bad balls, Dallas is leading that game by 7 to 10 points going into the half. And I don't know if Brock Purdy is able to come back from that deficit. So I'm expecting consistent, great defense from the San Francisco 49ers. I know, really stupid analogy, but honestly, that's what you need to do to win these NFC Championship games. And I'm looking for Brock Purdy to just give himself a chance in the third and fourth quarter. I think it's obvious to say if this game goes into double digits, that team wins. Just a question of who's going into double digits today. All right, guys, we have one more little subject to get to, and that is the coaching carousel. We finally have a hire. The first new coaching hire for the 2023 offseason has been mad, and people are more mad about it than the Andrea Riseborough Oscar nomination. Look it up, kids. Look it up. After interim coach Steve Wilks went 6-6 for the Carolina Panthers and almost got them to the playoffs, albeit in the NFC South, still almost got them to the playoffs. Owner David Tepper went, and in his mind, he went with a brighter choice in former Colts coach Frank Reich. Jay, you and I talked about this a bunch this week. Do you think this was the right decision?
Okay, I'm going to take a long and windy way to get there to answer that question, guys.
Don't make it too long. Don't take it too long and windy. Please. No.
I like Rabbi's right. He and I had, a really great back and forth exchange over text, which is what ultimately ended up, this being the closer topic for the show today. Because I enjoyed our back and forth so much because we had kind of similar, but also yet different viewpoints on this. To me, this is very much Panthers owner David Tepper, who likes to make big splashes, believing he has to have an offensive-minded head coach. Through the first 28 years of their existence, the Panthers have never had a head coach with an offensive background. And according to 3 people briefed on the matter, who were granted anonymity to speak freely on the situation, Tepper was determined to find such a coach capable of grooming a young quarterback because the Panthers plan to use the number 9 overall pick on that position and build an offense around him. But, to think that a defensive-minded head coach like Wilks couldn't accomplish the same thing forgive my French, guys, is bullshit. I guess Tepper hasn't heard of, Bill Belichick, Don Shula, Chuck Noll, Bill Cowher, Mike Tomlin, or Sean McDermott. All non-offensive coaches who had great success with young quarterbacks. because of their leadership ability and, their ability to hire the right assistants. But according to people aware of the Panthers' decision-making process, the organization was worried that if they hired a defensive-minded head coach like Wilks, they'd lose his offensive coordinator to a head coaching job once the team experienced success with that young quarterback they plan on drafting, and they feared that scenario would stunt the quarterback's growth. They apparently couldn't or wouldn't allow for the scenario that a strong leader maintains success by developing his coaching staff as well as his players. Given the way that Wilks handled the challenge, all the challenges he faced, and the leadership that he showed, he deserved a chance to at least try and do that. Look, hiring Reich over Wilks can be rationalized in any number of ways that on the surface make sense, especially from a football perspective. But it just looks bad to all of those who only see race here. A coach takes over an underachieving 1-4 team, so completely turns around the culture, gets an entire locker room to buy in and be competitive despite the lack of talent, especially at quarterback, and after losing their best offensive player when they traded running back Christian McCaffrey. But despite the overwhelming support of those players, he doesn't get the job. That's crappy on its own. But when the coach is black, it just looks so much worse. And it feeds exactly into what former Dolphins head coach Brian Flores filed his lawsuit about. The message is sent again and again. If you play your cards right, you just might get a chance to coach an NFL team under poor circumstances. But unless you're damn near perfect, don't expect to stick around for the long term. And you may know your stuff, but don't expect us to trust you with a prized young quarterback, because there's always a sexier option that looks more like the owner and is thus a smarter hire, as Rabbi alluded to in the intro to this. Now, look, I don't lump Wilks into that pile. I lump him into a different one, which Rabbi and I discussed over text. Last winter, the Raiders passed over Rich Bisaccia after he managed to get the Raiders to a 7-5 finish in their first playoff berth in 5 seasons after they fired John Gruden, hiring Josh McDaniels instead. Got less press because Bisaccia was white, so the optics weren't as bad, but it was another case of a white owner feeling he has to win the press conference with a splashy hire, and McDaniels was exactly that. Those types of hires always seem to be from the offensive side and are invariably white, so when the guy who loses out on the job is black, it just looks worse. Bisaccia, like Wilks, should have been given the job. Now, look, I agree that Reich deserved another shot, especially after what Colts owner Jim Irsay put him through. And if your thought is that you absolutely must have an offensive-minded guy, he's probably the best one available. But Tepper seemingly either doesn't understand or doesn't appreciate the challenges Wilks faced as an interim head coach. On Wilks' watch, the Panthers went 6-6, flirted with a playoff berth, pulled off upset wins over a Tampa Bay team that won the division and a Seattle team that also made the playoffs. Yeah, you can make the case that 6-6 is nothing to write home about, but it's a damn sight better than most would have produced in a similar situation. The resilience the Panthers displayed had many NFL insiders, including me, believing that if Wilks was given the chance to hire his own staff, have a hand in shaping a team to fit his vision through the draft, free agency, off-season programs, Carolina just might be a playoff team next season. Frank Reich might be the right person for the job, and I hope he succeeds, but I'm not sure the best person actually got the job here. Does that answer your question, Rabbi?
Well, it does. And the funny thing is, Wilks is named in the lawsuit as a co-defendant, so he's part of both sides of that argument. So you can,
which is why his lawyers made some statements after Reich got hired.
I think he had to. I think they had to in that situation. But he went 1-15 in a year where he was given no chance really with the Arizona Cardinals, which is why he was in that lawsuit. Anthony, what way do you see this? What is your opinion on this, and what could have been done?
Well, the two things. I mean, obviously, for the people who do see the racial side of this, there was a tidbit that I did find on Yahoo Sports. The last black interim head coach that was retained full time was Romeo Crennel. That was back in 2011. So you have to kind of go back quite a while to find a black head coach who was an interim basis who did get the job full time. But even if there are people out there who went down the route of everything has to be about race, and I had to explain to them that the Carolina Panthers front office and the ownership ignored the most important opinions in this whole factor. The players actually like the guy. I mean, you touched on the 6-6 record that he took over, despite the fact they traded away the best offensive player, and in a bad division. Carolina was in the thick of the playoff race, and a chance to win that division going into the final month of the season. And lineman Derek Brown even said, if you ask anybody in this and I quote, if you ask anybody in this locker room, we want Steve Wilks to be our next head coach. And that by itself is like, well, if the players wanted to keep him around, why didn't you listen to your own players? And it goes back to what you said last year with Bisaccia and the Vegas Raiders. I mean, he obviously, considering the situation he took that team over with the John Gruden fiasco and getting that team back to the playoffs, it was in this sense a case of the owner feeling like they need to win the PR battle and get the splash year higher. And in Josh McDaniels' case, we saw how that didn't work. That worked out not so well. And Frank Reich, Frank Reich's a good head coach. They won 2 division titles, made the playoffs twice in that time in Indianapolis. But considering who the owner was, and Jim Irsay, and how he handled that situation, I mean, it's no question that Reich deserved another opportunity. And just the way this whole situation was handled, I think it shows how a bigger picture as far as the hiring process that goes on in the National Football League. And even like I said, even if you take the race part of it out of it, the way some situations have been handled raises a lot more questions. And in this case, I just looked at it like if the players like the guy so much and they did play well and they commended him so much on being able to just show leadership under some really trying circumstances throughout the season, why not give the guy an opportunity to try to see what he can do when he has a chance to build his own coaching staff and be able to kind of implement his ideology on a full-time basis. So that's the one thing that I took away from this, was that the guy that did the good job isn't given an opportunity to see what he could do on a more full-term basis. And I think that was the situation. The thing I took away.
Yeah, and he's like Charlotte born and bred. He's a local guy. I mean, ties to the community and all.
What just bothers me is you got Tepper is Tepper. That's one of the reasons why Tepper was brought in to begin with, to be a kind of different way from Jerry Richardson. But one thing that kind of bothering me facts wise is Frank Reich was so unsplashy of a hire at Indianapolis. He wasn't even the first hire for that organization. Josh McDaniels was before he left. It's a tough situation. I'll sum it up in just a minute. Joe, a lot has been said already about this, but do you think this was the right hire?
Yeah, I think it's a timing thing, and I think it's the problem with some of these owners that, again, aren't real football guys and maybe really aren't even in touch with their own teams, but they have some guys around them who are advisors that, and again, I don't want to minimize anything and stuff. There's got to be, because I'm not in it, and none of us are in any of these interviews. We don't know if guys got along with each other. We don't know what happened. The guy has been he was fired in Arizona quickly. He was fired, in Carolina now. So you don't know if there's something there philosophy wise or whatever, but I think it's more of an ownership thing where somebody came to them and they go, hey, look who's out there. It's the same thing with this Sean Payton thing, right? They're like, hey, Sean Payton's out. Maybe we should get rid of our guy and see if we can draw him in. Maybe we should do this. Maybe we should do that. Because it's the same thing with Russell Wilson, right? Oh, let's go out and trade for Russ. Let's go trade for Aaron Rodgers. Let's go. It's not really a football decision. It's certainly not. I don't think it's even a personal decision. Yes. I think it's just this, hey, like you said, it's winning the press conference of, I want to show what I want to do for this organization. I want to show what I want to do for this team. Again, he's not from there. He didn't grow up a Carolina fan or anything. There's no such thing. So I think it's, because they didn't exist for, when he was a kid. So I'm just saying, I think it's one of those deals where somebody saw a name like that. It's the whole Tom Brady thing too, right? Let's go out and get rid of Derek Carr in the middle of the season, basically. Tell him he's not coming back because maybe we can draw in a Tom Brady, which is not going to help the organization any.
No.
The guy plays one more year. You're not winning a Super Bowl in Vegas with Tom Brady. It's, you need more than that one person. So again, I don't like to think of it racially because I don't see that way, but I think it's again, a guy who's not a football guy, who didn't grow up with football, whose dad wasn't involved in anything, the whole bit. He's a new guy. He's got a lot of money. He's got a new toy, and he's got some guys around him that he trusts for whatever reason that said, hey, look who's out there. You know, Frank Reich's going to be out there, and look what he did, and he could be this, and he could be that. It just happens that way. And I don't think it has anything to do with some of this stuff. You know, the Brian Flores thing, I think, is an opposite reaction, because he was actually successful where he was. I mean, they had a winning record at the time when he gets fired. So I think, but the fact that guys don't get rehired anywhere also shows you that there's something there.
That's the big problem, honestly.
Yeah, you know,
that's the problem.
When you see guys that leave the league, or like a Ben McAdoo, who got no job offers at all for 2 years before they finally brought him back, and now he's kind of working his way through. And, you know, somebody like Tepper is better off looking at his team and saying, we had no quarterback. We had Sam Darnold. We had this guy. You know, you need to work on that part of it with your GM, not worry about this part so much. And I think that he's not, I don't think Wilks ever been given a team that he can feel like he can build. Maybe maybe he's better off. And I know D'Amico Ryans will probably go to Houston, but maybe Wilks is better off going to a team at the bottom and saying, this is how I would build it. You know, this is my staff that I would bring in from fresh. Go to a place where there's nobody there. Start from scratch, draft a quarterback, see how you can build it, build an offense. Because, you know, again, what I say when we're not in the interviews is, I don't know who he says he'd want to bring in as his coordinators, or if he can get those guys. You know, same thing with some of these other coaches that all of a sudden they can't hire anybody because, again, those assistants don't believe that they can be successful, and they don't want to get tossed out on the street either. So I think there's a lot more to this than just what meets the eye originally. But I think it's an owner problem in Carolina more than anything.
Well, I mean, Joe, you and I have talked about this on more than one occasion, is that you got people whispering in an owner's ear, and they're not football people. So you've got people who are not football people advising an owner who's not a football guy on a football decision. And that's, to me, what the real, and that to me sums it up right there. That's the real issue. And like I said, I don't lump this decision in as a race, though I can understand why people are. But, you know, and yeah, you don't know what Wilks said in the room. But here's the thing. The problem with, you know, he needs a guy like that to get a start and to have a team that he can fully call his own. And yeah, it's going to require going to a team that's not, you know, currently set up to win immediately. Right. But the situation there is you need an owner and a front office that actually is willing to get on board and be patient. And my issue with like Houston, and I fear for D'Amico Ryans if he takes the job, is that Houston, and especially with Bob McNair as the owner, has a propensity of utter lack of patience. Right. Firing two guys back to back like that, you know, and you look at their history alone. With, you know,
whoa. Those guys were also over 67 years old, and they were never meant to be a long-term solution. Granted. But my whole thing is that you need Houston would seem to be the right situation, but where there's less pressure. But here's the problem. Bob McNair is not a patient owner. Okay. No,
that McNair family period has not been patient. Okay. And that's their problem.
And my other point I was just going to make is it might turn out to be better for Wilks, only because you don't want an owner sitting there. If Frank Reich went to another team, and 6 games in, that other team is 5-1. The last thing you want is a guy sitting there going, oh man, I could have had that guy. And because that's what we really, because somebody told him, look who's out there, that's who you should hire. So I don't think he would have gotten a fair shot. And even though he may not believe it at the time, he may be better moving on, going being a DC somewhere for another year, and then, you know,
maybe.
Agreed. All right, so I'm going to cut it off right there because we have to get out of here. But I do think it's this case by case basis, honestly, and I think this was the true case of this is not a Jeff Fisher who is getting another job after to go 8-8 in. This is a guy who's only been in one spot who fit the owner's model better. Yes, white, but this was more offensive, defensive, and yes, the players love him, But as we said, owners don't listen to their players. Owners listen to 3 other people in a war room, and that's not right. And that needs to be changed. I'm going to end it there. For Jay Kaplan, Anthony Strait, and once again, thank you, Joe Tufaro, for joining us. We will see you over the next few weeks as we'll talk about the Super Bowl as well. And then obviously we have off season, my least favorite time of year for any sport, talking about things that may or may not happen. Also, thank you to Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow, and Andrea Riseborough, just because I'm Steven Rabinowitz. So we're online on demand at youtube.com/onthesportslines, live at facebook.com/onthesportslines. Congratulations to Novak Djokovic for getting himself his record-tying 22nd major, winning his 10th Australian Open. And congrats to Scott Rowland, even though I told Anthony that I kind of love it when nobody gets inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame one year and someone has to announce, oh, I'm sorry, no one's coming in this year. Rowland does deserve it through his years in many organizations. But Jay, we have a Twitter.
Yes, we do. It's at ONTH Sportslines, where you will find a link to this show before kickoff happens at 3:00 this afternoon, and other interesting sports related tidbits throughout the sports calendar year that we think will be worth your while to check out.
Or maybe at 3:01. We're not sure. We'll see you next week. We'll have a variety of topics then. Enjoy Championship Sunday.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon, everyone.